When the wealthiest rancher in Wyoming walked into Clara Whitmore's freezing cabin on the worst night of her life, she thought he came to mock her like everyone else. Instead, he offered her something nobody ever had, a chance. But accepting meant leaving behind the only shelter she knew, and riding into a wilderness filled with men who would hate her on sight. Clara had two choices: starve alone in safety or risk everything for a future that might destroy her. What happened next would shake an entire frontier town to its foundation. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. The bread burned. Clara Whitmore stood in her cramped cabin kitchen, staring at the blackened loaf smoking in her cast iron pan, and felt something inside her crack. Not break. She'd been breaking for years, piece by piece, insult by insult. This was different. This was the small, tired sound of someone finally running out of fight. Outside, Wyoming winter pressed against the thin walls like a living thing trying to get in. The wind screamed. Ice formed on the inside of the window glass. Clara's breath came out in clouds that hung in the air before dissolving into the cold that never quite left. No matter how much firewood she burned, she was 27 years old and she was disappearing. Not physically. Her body took up space, more space than the women of Red Hollow thought proper for someone unmarried and alone. That was part of the problem. Her size was ammunition they'd been firing at her since childhood, and they never seemed to run out of bullets. But inside, where it mattered, Clara was fading. Each day, a little more invisible. Each rejection a little easier to accept. Each cruel word a little less surprising. The burned bread was supposed to be payment for Mrs. Henderson, who sometimes traded eggs for baked goods. Sometimes. When she felt charitable. When she wasn't too embarrassed to be seen accepting food from that Whitmore girl, Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and sank onto the wooden stool by her table. The only furniture in the cabin besides her narrow bed and the trunk that held everything she owned. The stool creaked. Everything creaked under her weight, and she'd learned to move carefully, quietly, trying to take up less space in a world that already thought she occupied too much. She was so tired. Tired of the sideways glances when she walked into town. Tired of conversations that died the moment she approached. Tired of young men who courted every unmarried woman in Red Hollow except her. As if she wasn't even a possibility worth considering. As if she wasn't a woman at all, just an obstacle to walk around on their way to someone prettier, smaller, more acceptable. Last Sunday, she'd overheard Sarah Miller and her mother talking outside the general store. "Poor thing," Mrs. Miller had said, her voice carrying that particular tone of pity mixed with disgust. 27 and not even a prospect. Well, no surprise there. No man wants a wife who'd eat him out of house and home. Sarah had giggled, actually giggled. Sarah, who Clara had played with as children before the world taught them they weren't supposed to be friends. "Mama, hush," Sarah had whispered, but she was still laughing. "What if she hears you? What if she does? Maybe someone ought to tell her the truth. She might be happier if she stopped pretending she'll ever marry and accepted her lot. Not every woman is meant for that life." Clara had stood frozen behind the corner, basket gripped in her white-knuckled hands, face burning with shame. She'd waited until they left before continuing to the store, and even then the shopkeeper had looked at her with something like pity when she counted out her coins for flour and salt. The memory sat in her chest now, heavy and familiar. A knock at the door shattered the silence. Clara's head snapped up. Nobody visited her. Nobody had reason to. For a wild moment, she wondered if she'd imagined it, if loneliness had finally driven her to hearing things that weren't there. The knock came again. Harder this time. Deliberate. She stood slowly, heart hammering, and crossed to the door. Her hand hesitated on the latch. It was past dark, and the storm outside was worsening. Nobody traveled in weather like this unless something was wrong. "Who is it?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Silas Boone." The name hit her like cold water. Everyone in Red Hollow knew Silas Boone, the rancher who lived miles outside town, running one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. Tall, scarred, with eyes the color of winter storms and a reputation for being harder than the Wyoming granite. He'd lost his wife years ago. Some said to illness, others whispered it was heartbreak when his fortune nearly collapsed. He'd clawed his way back through sheer stubbornness, and now he kept to himself. Running his ranch with an iron hand and rarely coming to town. Clara had seen him exactly twice in her life. Once at a distance, selling cattle. Once closer, when he'd walked past her without a glance, just like every other man. She opened the door. Silas Boone filled the doorway, snow-dusting his dark coat and wide-brimmed hat. He was taller than she remembered, raw-boned and weather-beaten, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against sun-darkened skin. His eyes found hers and held them with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she didn't. Some stubborn part of her refused to retreat in her own doorway. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "I need to speak with you." She became suddenly, painfully aware of her appearance. Flour on her dress, hair escaping its pins, the burned bread smell filling the cabin. Her size, always her size, impossible to hide or minimize. Yes. Come in." She moved aside, and he stepped past her, bringing cold air and snow with him. The cabin seemed to shrink with him in it. He removed his hat, snow falling to her floor, and looked around the small space with an expression she couldn't read. Taking inventory, maybe. Judging. "Can I—" She cleared her throat. "Can I offer you something? Coffee, or—" "I'll stand, thank you." He turned to face her fully, and Clara had to resist the urge to cross her arms over her chest defensively. "I'll be direct, Miss Whitmore. I'm not a man for dancing around subjects." "All right, I need a cook." The words hung in the cold air between them. Clara blinked, certain she'd misheard. "A cook," she repeated slowly. "For my ranch. My foreman tells me the men are threatening mutiny over the food situation. The last cook quit 3 weeks ago after one of the hands insulted his stew, and I've been rotating ranch hands through the kitchen ever since. It's not working. The food is barely edible. Morale is in the dirt, and I'm losing daylight fighting over who has to make breakfast." He said it all in the same flat tone, like he was describing a problem with fencing or cattle feed. Clara's mind raced, trying to understand why he'd come to her. "Mr. Boone, I don't understand. Why—" "You bake bread for half the town," he interrupted. "I've tasted it. Mrs. Henderson traded me a loaf for hay last month. It was the best bread I've had since my mother was alive." Clara's cheeks flushed. She hadn't known her bread traveled that far. "You make stew that Tom Fletcher claims could resurrect the dead," Silas continued. "Your pies apparently cause fistfights at church socials, and you need work." The last part wasn't a question. He knew. Of course he knew. Everyone knew Clara Whitmore lived alone in a cabin that was slowly falling apart, scraping by on charity baking and odd jobs that barely kept her fed. "I can pay fair wages," Silas said when she didn't respond. "Room and board included. 3 meals a day for roughly 20 men, sometimes more when we're running cattle. You'd have your own room in the ranch house. Supplies provided." It was more than fair. It was generous. It was everything she needed. It was also impossible. "Mr. Boone," Clara wrapped her arms around herself, hating how small her voice sounded. "I appreciate the offer, truly, but I can't." She stopped, searching for words that wouldn't reveal how deeply the truth cut. "Your ranch hands wouldn't want someone like me." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Someone like you. A woman. Alone. Living among men." The lies came easily because she'd been telling them to herself for years. Easier to pretend the problem was propriety than to name the real issue. "You'd have your own quarters," Silas said flatly. "Any man who bothers you would be dismissed immediately. That's not a concern." "It's not just that." She forced herself to meet his eyes, even though shame burned in her throat. She needed to make him understand, to release him from whatever misplaced obligation brought him here. "Mr. Boone, I know what people say about me, what they think. Your men they wouldn't respect someone like me in the kitchen. Someone like you," he repeated, and this time there was an edge to his voice. "You mean a woman who can cook better than anyone in 3 counties? A woman who keeps herself fed and sheltered with no help from anyone? A woman who doesn't quit when things get hard?" Clara stared at him. Nobody had ever described her that way. Nobody had ever made her sound like anything other than a burden, a joke, a woman to be pitied. "I mean someone they'd mock," she whispered. The truth scraped out of her, raw and ugly. Someone they'd laugh at behind her back. Someone they'd think isn't good enough to serve their food. I'm not..." She gestured helplessly at herself. I'm not what men expect. I'm not small or pretty or I don't give a damn what you look like. The words cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Claire's mouth snapped shut. Silas stepped closer and she saw something fierce in his eyes that made her breath catch. I need someone who can cook, someone reliable, someone who won't run at the first insult from a cowboy who thinks he's clever. I don't need pretty. Pretty won't feed 20 hungry men. Pretty won't hold together when a blizzard hits and supplies run low. Pretty is useless on a working ranch. He paused, and his voice dropped lower. I'm not offering you charity, Miss Whitmore. I'm offering you a job I need filled, and that you can do better than anyone else. What my men think about anything else is irrelevant. They'll eat your food and keep their mouths shut, or they'll find work elsewhere. Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Nobody had ever talked to her like this, like she was capable, like she mattered, like her size was so irrelevant it wasn't worth mentioning. I can't promise it'll be easy, Silas continued, his tone gentling slightly. Ranch life is hard. The men are rough. Some of them have mouths that run faster than their brains. But I can promise you'll be paid, fed, housed, and protected. And I can promise that anyone who makes your job harder than it needs to be will answer to me. He held her gaze, waiting. Outside, the wind howled. The cabin walls shuddered. Clara thought about another winter alone in this place, watching her supplies dwindle, watching the town's contempt grow, watching herself disappear a little more each day. She thought about the burned bread on her counter, about Mrs. Henderson's reluctant charity, about Sarah Miller's laughter. She thought about Silas Boone saying, I don't give a damn what you look like, with the conviction of someone who actually meant it. I don't know anything about ranch cooking, she said quietly. Just home cooking, small batches. Can you multiply a recipe? Yes. Can you work in a kitchen bigger than this cabin? I suppose so. Can you handle men with poor manners and worse opinions? Clara almost laughed. She'd been handling that her entire life. Yes. Silas nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then you're hired. I'll send a wagon for you and your things tomorrow morning. Pack what you need. Everything else will be provided. Tomorrow? Clara's heart jumped. That's too fast? He raised an eyebrow. You have pressing commitments keeping you here? She didn't. They both knew she didn't. If you need time to think about it, Silas said, and she heard the challenge in his voice. The test. I can come back in a week, 2 weeks. Give you time to consider. Clara looked around her cabin. The thin walls, the cold floor, the loneliness that had soaked into every corner. She thought about another week here, another month, another year of slowly fading away while the town forgot she existed. No, she said, and her voice came out stronger than before. Tomorrow is fine. I'll be ready. Something that might have been approval flickered across Silas's face. Good. Wagon will arrive at first light. Dress warm. It's a 4-hour ride in this weather. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with something, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he wasn't sure how to say. Miss Whitmore, he said finally, not looking at her. The men at my ranch, they're not town folk. They don't have town manners. They're rough and crude, and most of them haven't seen a woman in months. They're going to test you, push to see if you'll break. Clara's stomach tightened. I understand. I don't think you do. Now he did look at her, and his expression was harder than before. They're going to say things, cruel things. Not because they're evil, but because they're angry and tired and taking it out on whoever's easiest. You show weakness, they'll tear you apart. Not physically, he added quickly. I won't allow that. But they'll make your life hell in other ways. Then why? Clara's voice cracked. Why hire me at all? If you know they'll treat me that way. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm not hiring you to be their friend. I'm hiring you to feed them. And because I think you're stronger than they are, even if you don't know it yet. He opened the door, cold and snow rushed in. 4-hour ride, he repeated. The road gets worse before it gets better. Once we're there, there's no coming back until spring thaw. You'll be stuck with us for months. If you're going to change your mind, do it tonight. Then he was gone, disappearing into the storm like a ghost. Clara stood in her open doorway, watching snow blow across her threshold, feeling the temperature drop as winter tried to reclaim her cabin. Her hands were shaking, Her heart was racing. Terror and hope warred in her chest until she couldn't tell them apart. She closed the door and leaned against it, staring at the burned bread on her counter. "You're stronger than they are, even if you don't know it yet." Nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. Clara didn't sleep that night. She packed by candlelight, folding her 3 dresses, her spare shawl, the apron her mother had made before she died. Everything she owned fit in one trunk with room to spare. The poverty of it should have embarrassed her, but instead she felt something like relief. Nothing tying her here. Nothing to leave behind except loneliness. As dawn broke gray and cold, she heard wagon wheels outside. Clara took one last look at the cabin that had been her prison and her shelter. Then she picked up her trunk, stepped outside, and locked the door behind her. The wagon driver was a lean older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Jack, tipped his hat, and helped her load her trunk without comment or judgment. The simple courtesy nearly made her cry. The ride was brutal. 4 hours through country that grew wilder with every mile. They left Red Hollow behind, left civilization behind, and pushed into territory where the land itself seemed hostile to human presence. Mountains rose like teeth on the horizon. Snow-covered plains stretched endlessly. The cold was absolute. Clara wrapped herself in every blanket Jack provided, and still shivered until her bones ached. She tried to imagine what kind of men chose to live out here, this far from anything soft or comfortable. Tried to imagine cooking for them, living among them. Tried not to imagine their faces when they saw her. "Mr. Boone's a fair man," Jack said suddenly, breaking hours of silence. His breath steamed in the freezing air. "Tough, but fair. You do your job, he'll stand by you. That's more than most can say." "How long have you worked for him?" 8 years, since his wife died and the ranch nearly went under." Jack's hands were steady on the reins. Watched him rebuild it from nothing. Man's got steel in his spine. Had to survive what he went through. Clara wanted to ask more, but something in Jack's tone suggested the subject was closed. They rode in silence after that, the wagon creaking through snow that grew deeper as they climbed into the high country. Finally, as the sun began its descent, Jack pointed ahead. "There. Boone Ranch." Clara looked up and felt her breath catch. The ranch sprawled across a valley like something carved from the wilderness itself. The main house stood 2 stories tall, built from dark timber and stone, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, barns, bunkhouses, storage sheds, corrals. Cattle moved in distant fields, dark shapes against white snow. It was bigger than she'd imagined, rougher, more isolated, more real. "Bunkhouses there," Jack said, pointing to a long, low building. "That's where the men sleep. Kitchen's in the main house, through that side door. Mr. Boone will show you around." As they approached, Clara saw men emerging from the bunkhouse, 20 or more, drawn by the sound of the wagon. Cowboys in worn clothes, faces hard from outdoor work, eyes tracking her with undisguised curiosity. The wagon stopped. Clara didn't move. Couldn't move. She sat frozen, staring at all those watching faces, and felt every insecurity she'd ever had rise up like a tide trying to drown her. "They're going to laugh. They're going to see you and laugh, and you'll have come all this way for nothing." The main house door opened. Silas Boone stepped out, and immediately every man straightened slightly. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried across the yard with absolute authority. "This is Miss Whitmore. She's your new cook. You'll treat her with respect, or you'll leave. Those are the only options. Anyone have a problem with that?" Silence. The men shifted, exchanging glances, but nobody spoke. Clara forced herself to climb down from the wagon. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. Several cowboys smirked. One muttered something to his neighbor that made them both snicker. Silas's head snapped toward them. "You two. Names." The smirks vanished. "Garrett and Mills, sir." "You find something funny?" "No, sir." "Good. Because I'd hate to send you packing before you even tasted Miss Whitmore's cooking. I hear it's good enough to make grown men cry." He looked at Clara. "Come on, I'll show you the kitchen." Clara followed him across the yard, feeling every eye on her back, hearing whispers she couldn't quite make out. The words didn't matter. The tone told her everything she needed to know. They thought she was a joke. The kitchen was bigger than her entire cabin had been. 2 enormous wood-burning stoves dominated one wall. Counters stretched along the others. Pots and pans hung from ceiling hooks. A huge table filled the center, scarred from years of use. Everything was covered in a thin layer of grime that spoke of weeks of neglect. "It's a mess," Silas said bluntly. "The men have been rotating kitchen duty and nobody cares enough to clean properly. You'll have your work cut out for you." Clara set down her trunk and walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the counters, testing the stove doors, inventorying supplies. Despite the dirt, it was functional, well-equipped. A kitchen someone had once loved. "Your room is upstairs," Silas continued. "Second door on the right. It's small, but it's private. Lock on the door. No one bothers you there. Understood?" "Yes." "Breakfast is at 5, dinner at 6. The men work hard and eat like it. You'll need to plan accordingly." He paused. "Think you can handle this?" Clara looked at the dirty kitchen. Thought about 20 hungry, hostile men waiting to prove she couldn't do this job. Thought about the 4-hour journey back to Red Hollow through snow and isolation, and how she had nowhere to go even if she could make it. "I can handle it," she said. Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. I'll send Jack to help you move your things upstairs. Dinner's in 3 hours. I'll have the men clear out so you can work." He was almost to the door when Clara found her voice again. "Mr. Boone?" He turned. "Why did you really hire me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "You could have found someone else. Someone who'd fit better." "Why me?" Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something she couldn't name. "Because I'm tired of watching capable people get crushed by other people's stupidity," he said. "And because someone once gave me a chance when nobody else would. Seemed like it was my turn to pass it on." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in the kitchen that would either become her salvation or her destruction. She took a deep breath, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The first loaf of bread came out of the oven at 4:30 the next morning, and Clara's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She'd been awake since 2, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar room with its unfamiliar sounds. Wind against different walls, men's voices drifting from the bunkhouse, the creak and settle of a house that wasn't hers. Finally, she'd given up, dressed in the dark, and crept downstairs to the kitchen where at least she knew what to do with her hands. The kitchen had taken her until midnight to clean. Every surface scrubbed, every pot scoured, the stoves blackened and polished until they gleamed dully in the lamplight. Her back ached and her fingers were raw, but the space was finally hers, clean, organized, ready. Now she stood in that clean kitchen, watching steam rise from 6 perfect loaves of cornbread, and felt terror claw at her throat. In less than 30 minutes, 20 men would walk through that door expecting to be fed. 20 men who'd already decided she was a joke. 20 men who were waiting for her to fail so they could laugh and tell Silas Boone he'd made a mistake hiring the fat woman from town. Clara's breathing came faster. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. She thought about the long winter ahead, trapped here with men who hated her, cooking meal after meal while they mocked every bite. Thought about Silas's disappointed face when he realized she couldn't do this after all. Thought about going back to Red Hollow in defeat, proving everyone right. "No," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "No." She forced her hands steady and reached for the eggs. Whatever happened, they'd eat well this morning. She'd make sure of that. By 5 o'clock, the long dining table was loaded with food, cornbread still warm from the oven, scrambled eggs cooked with butter and cream, thick slices of bacon, crispy at the edges, fried potatoes with onions, a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, biscuits with honey and jam. It was too much food. She knew it was too much. But she couldn't help herself. Cooking was the only language she'd ever been fluent in, and right now she needed to speak it perfectly. The door opened and men poured in like a flood. They came loud and rough, boots stomping, voices overlapping, the smell of horses and leather and unwashed bodies filling the space Clara had spent all night cleaning. They stopped when they saw the table, went silent, stared. Clara stood by the stove, hands clasped in front of her apron, and waited for the mockery to start. Instead, a young cowboy with red hair and a face full of freckles said, "Holy hell!" "Language," Silas's voice cut through from the doorway. He entered last, his eyes sweeping the table before landing on Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sit down. Eat." The men didn't need to be told twice. They descended on the food like starving wolves, filling plates, reaching across each other, talking with their mouths full. Clara watched from her position by the stove, hands twisting in her apron, waiting for complaints. They didn't come. Instead, she heard the scrape of forks on plates, the sound of chewing. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the table, "Christ, this is good. Told you to watch your mouth," Silas said mildly, but he was eating too, and Clara saw him reach for a second biscuit. "Sorry, boss, but—" The man gestured at his plate helplessly. "When's the last time we had eggs that didn't taste like boot leather?" "3 weeks ago, before Patterson quit," someone else answered. "Right after you called his stew pig slop." "It was pig slop. This—" He pointed at Clara with his fork. "This is actual food." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She turned back to the stove, pretending to check the coffee, while the men kept eating and talking around her like she wasn't there. It wasn't exactly praise, but it wasn't mockery either. She'd take it. The meal lasted 20 minutes. The men ate everything. Every scrap of cornbread, every bite of egg, every strip of bacon. They left the table cleaner than some women's Sunday china. Then they filed out, most without looking at her, heading to their work while dawn barely lightened the eastern sky. Silas stayed behind. He stood by the door while Clara began clearing plates, watching her with that same unreadable expression. The silence stretched until Clara couldn't stand it anymore. "Was it all right?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "It was good." "Just good?" "Best breakfast this ranch has seen in 5 years," Silas said flatly. "But you already knew that." Clara set down the plates she was holding. "I didn't. I wasn't sure if they'd eat it? If they'd complain?" He moved closer, and Clara saw exhaustion written in every line of his face. She wondered if he'd slept at all. "Miss Whitmore, those men just ate more in 20 minutes than they usually consume in an entire day. Half of them looked like they wanted to cry. You did fine." The praise should have pleased her. Instead, it made her nervous. They didn't say anything. They're cowboys. They don't know how to give compliments to women who aren't serving them whiskey or worse. But they noticed. Trust me. He picked up a stack of dirty plates before Clara could protest, carried them to the wash basin like it was the most natural thing in the world for the ranch owner to clear his own table. "Mr. Boone, you don't have to—" "I know." He pumped water into the basin. "But I also know you just cooked for 20 men on 3 hours of sleep. Least I can do is wash some dishes." They worked in silence for a while, Clara washing and Silas drying, falling into an easy rhythm that felt strange in its simplicity. Clara kept waiting for him to leave, to go do whatever important ranch business required his attention. Instead, he stayed, his presence solid and quiet beside her. "They're going to test you," he said finally. "Today, tomorrow, all week. They'll push to see where your boundaries are, to see if you'll quit." Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. "I won't quit." "Good." He set down a dried plate. "But you need to push back when they cross lines. Don't just take it." "I've been taking it my whole life," Clara said quietly. "I know how to survive it." "I'm not asking you to survive." Silas's voice was harder now. "I'm asking you to fight. There's a difference." Clara wanted to argue, to explain that fighting only made things worse, that keeping her head down was how she'd made it this far. But she'd also spent 27 years getting smaller and quieter, and where had that gotten her? Living alone in a falling-apart cabin, half invisible to a town that couldn't be bothered to remember her name. Maybe Silas had a point. The real testing started at dinner that night. Clara had spent the afternoon preparing. Beef stew thick with vegetables and dark gravy. Fresh bread. Real yeast bread this time, not just cornbread. Apple pie made from dried fruit she'd found in the pantry, sweetened with molasses and cinnamon. The men came in hungry and loud, filling the dining hall with noise and the smell of hard work. They ate eagerly at first, the same focused silence as breakfast. But halfway through the meal, one of them, Garrett, Clara thought his name was, one of the ones who'd smirked at her arrival, pushed his bowl away. "Stew's too salty," he announced to the table at large. The room went quiet. Clara froze by the stove. Silas looked up from his own meal, eyes narrowing. "Tastes fine to me." "Well, maybe your taste buds died along with your last cook," Garrett said, and some of the other men snickered. "I'm just saying, a woman who cooks this much salt is probably used to hiding bad flavors." The insult was barely veiled. Clara felt it land like a fist to her stomach. She opened her mouth, but Silas spoke first. "You finished with that bowl, Garrett?" "Yeah, too salty to—" "Good. Then you can leave the table." Garrett's smirk faded. "What?" "You heard me." Silas's voice was dangerously quiet. "I said anyone who disrespected Miss Whitmore could leave. You just did, so leave." "Boss, I was just—" "Leaving. Now." Garrett looked around the table for support, but the other men suddenly found their bowls very interesting. He stood slowly, face red, and stalked toward the door. He paused when he reached it, looking back at Silas with something ugly in his expression. "You're really going to choose her over your own men?" "I'm choosing competence over stupidity," Silas said coldly. "And I'm choosing cooks who can actually cook over cowboys, who can't tell the difference between seasoning and insult. You want back in this dining hall, you apologize to Miss Whitmore. Until then, you can eat your own cooking." Garrett slammed the door on his way out. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara stood by the stove, face burning, hands trembling. Every eye was on her, and she wanted to disappear into the floor. This was exactly what she'd feared, causing trouble, making enemies, being the reason for conflict. Then the red-haired young cowboy from breakfast spoke up. "Stew's not too salty. It's perfect." Another man nodded. "Best meal I've had in months." "Garrett's always been an ass," someone else muttered. "Just mad because Patterson used to let him get away with complaining." The tension broke like a snapped wire. Men went back to eating, conversations resumed, and Clara slowly exhaled. Silas caught her eye across the room and gave her the smallest nod. She nodded back. But that night, lying in her small room upstairs, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the scene. Garrett's sneer, Silas's cold defense, the way the whole ranch had held its breath waiting to see what would happen. She'd won this round, but only because Silas had fought for her. What happened when he wasn't there to protect her? The answer came 2 days later. Clara was in the kitchen mid-morning preparing lunch when she heard shouting from the yard. She looked out the window and saw 2 cowboys arguing near the barn. As she watched, one of them shoved the other, and suddenly they were fighting. Really fighting. Fists flying, bodies crashing into the fence. Other men came running. Someone shouted for Silas. The fight got uglier. Clara didn't think. She grabbed the pot of stew she'd been stirring and marched outside. "Stop it!" Her voice cut through the chaos. "Stop it right now!" The fighters ignored her. One landed a punch that sent the other sprawling. Blood spattered in the snow. Clara walked straight into the middle of the fight and dumped the entire pot of hot stew over both their heads. They yelped and jumped apart, dripping gravy and chunks of beef, staring at her in shock. Every man in the yard went silent. Clara stood between the fighters, empty pot in hand, and felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "That was tomorrow's lunch," she said, voice shaking with anger. 2 days of work, gone. Because you two can't control yourselves like grown men." "He started it," one of them sputtered, wiping stew from his eyes. "Called me a—" "I don't care who started it. I care that you're wasting food and my time." Clara looked around at the assembled cowboys. "I cook 3 meals a day for this ranch. I get up before dawn and work past dark. And I won't have it wasted because you act like children." "It's just stew," the other fighter said sullenly. "Just stew?" Clara's voice rose. "You try making stew for 20 men with limited supplies in the middle of winter. You try stretching beef and vegetables to last through the next storm. It's not just stew. It's hours of work you just destroyed because you wanted to prove whose fists were bigger." She turned and marched back to the kitchen, pot clutched in her white-knuckled hands, leaving stunned silence behind her. It wasn't until she was inside that she started shaking. She'd just yelled at cowboys, dumped food on them, made a scene in front of the entire ranch. Everything she'd spent her whole life avoiding, confrontation, attention, taking up space, she'd just done all at once. Silas was going to fire her. He had to. She'd overstepped, made trouble, embarrassed his men. But when Silas appeared in the kitchen doorway 10 minutes later, he didn't look angry. He looked like he was trying very hard not to laugh. "Did you really dump a full pot of stew on Mills and Thompson?" Clara set down the spoon she'd been gripping. "They were fighting. They deserved it." "They did," Silas agreed. "But most people would have called for help, not marched into the middle of it. The stew was already ruined once they knocked over the fence post. I just used it." This time Silas did laugh. a short, rough sound that seemed surprised out of him. Fair enough. For what it's worth, those two have been looking for an excuse to fight all week. You probably saved them broken bones. Gravy washes off easier than bandages. I'll need to make new stew for tomorrow. I'll have Jack bring extra beef from the storehouse. He paused. That was gutsy, what you did. Stupid, but gutsy. Are you firing me? What? No. Silas looked genuinely surprised. Why would I fire you? Because I caused a scene, made trouble. You stopped a fight that would have cost me 2 workers for the rest of the week, Silas said. And you did it without anyone getting seriously hurt. That's not causing trouble, that's solving it. He left before Clara could respond, and she stood in her kitchen feeling something unfamiliar unfolding in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. Pride. The next morning, both fighters showed up to breakfast with matching black eyes and matching apologies. They mumbled them to their plates, but Clara heard them clearly enough. She served them extra bacon without comment. After that, something shifted. The men still didn't talk to her much. They still ate in their rough, crude way, manners forgotten in favor of efficiency. But they stopped testing her, stopped pushing. When she asked someone to fetch water or carry supplies, they did it without argument. When she cooked, they ate without complaint. And slowly, Clara began to notice things. Thompson liked his coffee with 3 spoons of sugar, even though he pretended to drink it black. The red-haired cowboy, she learned his name was Danny, always took the burned edges of cornbread because he said they tasted better. Mills asked for seconds quietly, embarrassed by his appetite. Jack never took the last of anything, always leaving it for someone else. She started cooking to their preferences without being asked. Extra sugar left by the coffee pot. The burned corners set aside for Danny. Bigger portions for Mills, making sure Jack got first pick before the others descended. The men noticed. How'd you know I liked my eggs runny? Thompson asked one morning, staring at his plate. Clara shrugged. You always break them up fast? Figured you wanted the yolk to run. Nobody's ever... I've been eating here 5 years and nobody ever noticed that. Well, Clara said, turning back to the stove to hide her face. Now someone has. 3 weeks into her time at the ranch, the first real storm hit. It came fast and mean, turning the world white in under an hour. The men rushed to secure the animals and supplies before the worst of it arrived. Clara watched from the kitchen window as they worked, moving with practiced efficiency, even as the wind tried to knock them sideways. By nightfall, the ranch was buried. Snow piled against the buildings. Wind screamed like something alive and angry. The men huddled in the dining hall, too cold and exhausted to return to the bunkhouse, and Clara kept the stoves burning and the coffee coming while the storm raged outside. Can't remember the last time we had a blow this bad, Jack said, warming his hands around a mug. Probably lose some cattle. How long will it last? Clara asked. Day, maybe 2. Hard to say. He looked at her with concern. You got enough food? I've got enough. We won't starve. But she worried anyway, counted supplies in her head, calculated how to stretch what they had. The storm could last longer than Jack predicted, could trap them here for days. Around midnight, someone knocked on the front door, not the kitchen door, the front entrance to the main house. It was barely audible over the wind, but Clara heard it. She looked around the dining hall, counting men. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone except... Silas appeared from the direction of the front door, carrying something wrapped in blankets. Something small. As he entered the lamplight, Clara saw dark hair, brown skin, and terrified eyes staring out from the bundle. A child. Found him wandering outside, Silas said tersely. Half frozen. Don't know where he came from or how he got here. The men muttered, shifting uncomfortably. Clara saw the calculation in their faces. One more mouth to feed, one more problem to deal with during a storm that was already stretching resources thin. Give him to me, Clara said. Silas brought the child to her. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, his skin gray with cold, his whole body shaking. Clara wrapped him in her own shawl and carried him to the warmest spot by the stove. What's your name? She asked gently. The boy didn't answer. His eyes were huge with fear. It's all right, Clara murmured. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. She heated milk with honey and held it to his lips. The boy drank in desperate gulps, and Clara's heart broke, for whatever terror had driven a child out into a killing storm alone. He's probably from the Shoshone camp, Jack said quietly. 10 miles north. Sometimes they winter near the creek. 10 miles? Clara looked at the boy in horror. He walked 10 miles in this? Or got separated from a hunting party. Either way, he won't be going back until the storm clears. Clara nodded. Then he stays here. With me. Miss Whitmore, one of the men said hesitantly. We don't really have the supplies to... He's a child. Clara cut him off, her voice sharp. We'll manage. She looked up and found Silas watching her with that same unreadable expression, but he nodded once and the matter was settled. The boy slept in Clara's room that night, curled in her bed while she sat in a chair beside him, watching to make sure he kept breathing. His name, she learned the next morning in broken English and hand gestures, was something that sounded like running deer. He was 8 years old. He'd gotten separated from his father during a hunting trip and wandered, lost, until he saw the ranch lights. For 3 days, the storm trapped them all inside. Clara stretched food thin, making soups last longer, using every scrap. The men grumbled but didn't complain when portions shrank. Running Deer stayed close to Clara, helping in small ways, fetching wood, stirring pots, setting the table. He barely spoke, but his eyes followed her everywhere. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The world outside was transformed, buried under snow that came up to the windows. But the sky was clear, painfully bright, and the men could finally venture out to assess the damage. That afternoon, 3 Shoshone men arrived on horseback, searching for the lost boy. The reunion was brief but emotional. Running Deer's father, holding his son like he couldn't believe he was real, speaking rapidly in their language, while the boy responded in between sobs. The father approached Clara, his expression solemn. He spoke in halting English, thanking her for protecting his son, for feeding him, for keeping him safe when the storm tried to kill him. You have good heart, he said simply. The boy told me. You share food when others want him to leave. You keep him warm. I do not forget this. He pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch decorated with beads. Inside were herbs Clara didn't recognize, fragrant and carefully wrapped. For healing, the man explained, when sickness comes. You use this. Remember Running Deer? Remember you saved life, and debt is owed. Then they were gone, 3 figures on horseback disappearing into the white landscape, and Clara stood in the yard holding the pouch and trying not to cry. That was well done, Silas said quietly behind her. Clara turned. He stood in the doorway, watching her with something in his expression she'd never seen before. Something warm. I didn't do anything special, she said. He needed help. Most people would have turned him away. Too much trouble during a storm. Too risky. He was a child. I know. Silas stepped closer. But you still chose to help when it cost you something, when it made your job harder. That says something about who you are. Clara looked down at the beaded pouch. His father said I saved a life. But Running Deer probably would have survived anyway. Someone else would have... Nobody else did, Silas interrupted. You did. Stop making yourself smaller than you are. The words hit Clara like cold water. She looked up at him, startled, and saw understanding in his eyes. He knew. Somehow he knew about all the years of making herself less, quieter, easier to overlook. I don't know how to be any other way, she whispered. Then learn. His voice was rough but not unkind. Because you're too damn useful to waste. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Clara standing in the snow with tears freezing on her cheeks and something that felt dangerously like hope burning in her chest. That night, after the men had eaten and retired to the bunkhouse, Clara and Silas washed dishes together in their now familiar silence. It had become a routine. Every evening after dinner, the ranch owner rolled up his sleeves and helped clean, working side by side with his cook while the house settled into quiet around them. Usually they didn't talk much. But tonight, Silas broke the silence. You ever wonder why I'm not married? He asked abruptly. Clara nearly dropped the plate she was washing. That's not my business. I was married, Eleanor. Beautiful woman. Came from money, had education, knew how to move in society. He dried a pot mechanically, not looking at Clara. When I had money, she loved me, or said she did. When the ranch nearly failed and I lost everything, she left. Said she couldn't live in poverty, said she deserved better. I'm sorry. Don't be. Taught me something valuable. Now Silas did look at her, his scarred face serious. Beauty fades. Money comes and goes. But character? That's permanent. That's what matters when everything else falls apart. Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she was supposed to say anything at all. You have character, Miss Whitmore, Silas continued quietly. More than most people I've met. More than Eleanor ever had, for all her polish. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise. He set down the dried pot and left without another word, and Clara stood alone in the kitchen with her heart doing strange things in her chest. The weeks passed and winter deepened its grip on the ranch. Clara fell into rhythms. Up before dawn, coffee started, bread in the oven before the men stirred, breakfast at 5. Mid-morning baking, lunch at noon, afternoon preparations, dinner at 6, dishes with Silas, bed late, repeat. It should have been monotonous, should have felt like drudgery. Instead, Clara felt something she'd never experienced before. Purpose. The men needed her, really needed her. Not in the pitying way Red Hollow had tolerated her existence, but in a real practical way that had nothing to do with charity. Without her, they'd starve or eat poorly enough to affect their work. With her, the ranch functioned. She wasn't invisible here, wasn't overlooked. She was essential. And slowly, impossibly, some of the men stopped seeing her as just the cook. Danny started telling her jokes while she kneaded bread, terrible puns that made her laugh despite herself. Thompson asked her advice about a letter he was writing to his mother. Mills taught her how to sharpen knives properly. Jack brought her wild herbs he found on rides, things to add flavor to her cooking. They weren't friends exactly, but they weren't strangers anymore either. One evening, about 6 weeks into her time at the ranch, Clara was finishing dinner cleanup when she heard shouting from the bunkhouse. Male voices, angry and overlapping. She froze, listening, trying to determine if it was serious or just the usual rough joking. Then she heard her name. Her blood went cold. She moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. "Telling you, she's the best cook we've ever had," Danny's voice, defensive. "Best cook, maybe, but she's still—" A voice Clara didn't recognize. "Come on, you all see it. She's not exactly—" "Finish that sentence and I'll finish you," Mills growled. "I don't care what she looks like. She kept us fed through the worst storm in 5 years. She saved that kid's life. She makes food that actually tastes like something. What the hell have you done lately, Carter?" "I'm just saying what we're all thinking," Carter shot back. "The boss hired her because he felt sorry for her. Charity case. Probably hoping she'd be grateful enough to—" The sound of a fist hitting flesh was unmistakable. Clara jumped back from the door as the shouting erupted into chaos. She should go back to her room, should pretend she hadn't heard. But her feet carried her to the kitchen window instead, where she could see the bunkhouse door fly open and men spill out into the yard. Silas got there first, appearing from the barn like a storm himself. His voice cracked across the yard with absolute authority. "What the hell is going on?" The men froze. Mills had Carter by the collar, fist drawn back for another punch. Danny was restraining Thompson, who looked ready to join the fight. "Carter's running his mouth," Mills said flatly. "Saying things about Miss Whitmore he's got no right to say." Silas's expression went dangerously cold. "What things?" Carter pulled free from Mills, wiping blood from his split lip. "Just the truth. That you hired her because nobody else would have her. That she's—" "One more word and you're fired," Silas cut him off. "Not suspended, not disciplined. Fired, packed and gone tonight." "For defending your cook?" Carter laughed bitterly. "Come on, boss. Everyone knows that she's the best cook this ranch has seen in years," Silas said, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. "Everyone knows she works harder than half my cowboys. Everyone knows she saved us time and money and suffering. What exactly is your complaint, Carter? That she doesn't meet your standards of beauty? That she takes up space you think she hasn't earned?" Carter's face flushed red. "I just think—" "I don't care what you think. You're fired. Get your things and leave." The yard went silent. Carter stared at Silas in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious. This ranch doesn't have room for men who don't pull their weight, and it sure as hell doesn't have room for men who disrespect the people keeping them fed." Silas looked around at the assembled cowboys. "That goes for everyone. I hired Miss Whitmore because she's good at her job. Anyone who has a problem with that can pack up and join Carter on the road. Nobody moved. Good. Silas turned back to Carter. You have 1 hour. After that, I'll throw you off the property myself. He walked away, and the men slowly dispersed, leaving Carter standing alone in the snow. Clara watched from the window, her hands pressed to her mouth, emotions churning too fast to name. Mills had defended her. Danny and Thompson had been ready to fight for her. And Silas had fired someone, actually fired them, for insulting her. She wasn't invisible here. She was protected, valued. The realization made her knees weak. Later that night, there was a soft knock on her door. Clara opened it to find Silas standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to make sure you're all right, he said, in case you heard what happened. I heard, Clara admitted. I'm sorry you had to deal with Carter's stupidity. You fired him. I did. Silas met her eyes steadily. And I'd do it again. I won't have that kind of talk on my ranch. Clara swallowed hard. Mr. Boone, you don't have to defend me. I'm used to— I know what you're used to, he interrupted gently. I know the town treated you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter. But you matter here. Your work matters. You matter. And anyone who can't see that can find employment elsewhere. He said it so simply, like it was obvious, like Clara's worth wasn't up for debate. Thank you, she whispered. Silas nodded and turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Whitmore, I didn't hire you out of pity. I hired you because I needed a good cook, and you're the best I could find. Everything since then has only proved I made the right choice. He was gone before Clara could respond, and she closed her door and leaned against it, trying to breathe around the tightness in her chest. For the first time in her life, someone had fought for her, multiple someones. Men who barely knew her had stood up in her defense, risked their own comfort and safety to protect her dignity. Clara slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the door, and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness or shame this time, but from something else entirely. Something that felt like healing. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, fighting winter for every inch of ground. Snow retreated in patches, leaving mud that sucked at boots and turned the ranch yard into a slick mess. The men's moods lifted with the temperature, and Clara found herself actually looking forward to mornings in the kitchen instead of dreading them. She'd been at Boone Ranch for 3 months now, and the transformation still surprised her. The men who'd once looked through her now greeted her by name. Danny brought her the first wildflowers that pushed through the melting snow, presenting them with an embarrassed grin that made her laugh. Mills asked for her cornbread recipe to send to his sister. Even Thompson, the gruffest of them all, had taken to leaving his coffee cup by the wash basin instead of abandoning it on the table. Small things, but they mattered. It was a Tuesday morning in late March when everything changed. Clara was rolling out biscuit dough, flour dusting her apron, when she heard a carriage approaching. Unusual. They rarely had visitors, and never this early. She wiped her hands and moved to the window. The carriage was expensive, black lacquered wood with brass fittings, pulled by 2 matched horses that looked better fed than most of the ranch stock. It stopped in front of the main house, and a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, Clara could see she was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that made other women look away and men straighten their shoulders. She wore a deep green traveling dress that probably cost more than Clara earned in a year, her dark hair perfectly arranged under a fashionable hat. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted their right to any space they occupied. Clara's stomach tightened with a feeling she couldn't name. The woman knocked on the front door of the main house. After a moment, Silas answered, and Clara saw him freeze in the doorway. His whole body went rigid, and even from this distance she could see the shock on his face. The woman said something, Silas replied. Then, after a long pause, he stepped aside and let her in. The door closed, and Clara stood at her window, staring at the expensive carriage, feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. Who's that? Danny appeared at her elbow, peering out the window. Fancy rig. I don't know. But she had a sinking feeling she did know, or at least knew who it had to be. There was only one woman who could make Silas Boone look like he'd seen a ghost. Jack confirmed it an hour later when he came to fetch coffee. That's Eleanor Pierce, he said quietly, accepting the cup Clara handed him. Silas's former. His wife? Never got that far, thank heaven. But they were engaged once, before the ranch went bad. She left him when the money dried up. Jack's expression was grim. Heard she married some banker in Cheyenne. Guess that didn't work out either, if she's back here. Clara's hands shook as she poured her own coffee. What does she want? Nothing good, I'd wager. Jack glanced toward the main house. Woman like that doesn't come back unless she wants something. And she sure as hell isn't here for the scenery. Eleanor stayed for lunch. Clara cooked mechanically, her mind elsewhere, trying not to imagine what was being discussed in Silas's office. When she carried the tray to the dining room, Silas had requested a private meal, just him and his guest. Eleanor looked up with eyes that assessed Clara in one sweep and dismissed her just as quickly. Thank you, Eleanor said, her voice cultured and smooth. You may go. Clara set down the tray and left without responding, but she felt Eleanor's gaze following her out. Felt the judgment in it, the casual superiority of someone who'd never had to question their place in the world. She hated how small it made her feel. Hated that 3 months of growing confidence could be shaken by one beautiful woman's dismissive glance. Dinner that evening was tense. The men sensed something was wrong. They always did, like animals before a storm. They ate quietly, exchanging glances, and Clara caught more than one of them looking toward the main house, where lamplight still glowed in Silas's office windows. Silas didn't come to help with dishes. For the first time in 3 months, Clara washed alone, and the absence felt like a hole in the evening. She told herself it was fine. He had a guest. He was busy. It meant nothing, but her hands still shook as she scrubbed plates. The next morning, Eleanor was still there. Clara saw her through the window, walking the property with Silas, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. She was talking, animated and smiling, and Silas was listening with that same unreadable expression he'd worn when Clara first met him. Vulture, Danny muttered, coming to stand beside Clara. That's what she is, circling back now that the ranch is profitable again. It's not our business, Clara said, but her voice came out flat. Maybe not, but it's still wrong. Danny shook his head. Boss deserves better than someone who only wants him when he's useful. Clara wanted to agree, but the words stuck in her throat. What right did she have to judge who Silas spent time with? She was his cook, nothing more. The dishes they'd washed together, the quiet conversations, the way he defended her, none of that gave her claim to his personal life. Still, it hurt. Eleanor stayed for 3 days, and each day Clara felt herself shrinking back into old patterns, making herself smaller, speaking less, moving through the kitchen like a ghost while the beautiful woman occupied Silas's time and attention. On the third evening, Clara was preparing dinner when Eleanor swept into the kitchen unannounced. I wanted to see where the meals come from, she said, looking around with barely concealed disdain. Silas speaks highly of your cooking. Thank you, ma'am. Clara kept her eyes on the vegetables she was chopping. How long have you been here? 3 months. And before that? Eleanor moved closer, circling like she was examining livestock. Where did you work? I lived in Red Hollow, did some baking, odd jobs. How quaint. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. And Silas hired you despite having no real experience with ranch cooking? How generous of him. The emphasis on generous made it clear what Eleanor thought. That this was charity, pity, Silas's soft heart getting the better of his business sense. Claire's knife stilled on the cutting board. I had the experience he needed. I'm sure you did. Eleanor picked up a spoon, examined it, set it down like it had contaminated her glove. It must be difficult, being the only woman among so many rough men. Lonely, I imagine. The men are respectful, are they? Eleanor's laugh was light and cutting. How wonderful! Though I suppose when one doesn't have to worry about unwanted attention, things are simpler. The insult landed like a slap. Claire's face burned, but she forced herself to keep chopping vegetables, to not give Eleanor the satisfaction of a reaction. I only mean, Eleanor continued, that you're fortunate Silas is such a kind man. Not everyone would be so understanding about hiring someone who, well, someone in your situation. My situation. A woman alone, unmarried, with limited prospects. Eleanor's voice dripped false sympathy. It must have been dreadful living in that little cabin. Silas told me about it. How you had nothing, no family, no real future. How noble of him to offer you this position. Clara set down her knife very carefully. Her hands were shaking with rage now, not fear. Is there something you need, Miss Pierce? Or did you come here just to insult me? Eleanor's eyes widened with mock innocence. Insult you? My dear, I'm simply acknowledging reality. Surely you know what people must think. A woman like you, living among all these men, working for a wealthy rancher. It's bound to cause talk. There's no talk to cause. I'm the cook, nothing more. Of course, Eleanor smiled. Though one has to wonder why Silas insists on washing dishes with you every evening. Such an intimate arrangement. Claire's breath caught. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed those quiet moments in the kitchen, hadn't thought they mattered to anyone but her and Silas. The ranch hands must find it amusing, Eleanor continued, warming to her cruelty. Watching their boss play housemaid for a woman who... She paused, letting her gaze travel over Clara's body with deliberate slowness. Well, for someone who clearly enjoys her own cooking perhaps too much. The words hit like physical blows. All of Clara's carefully built confidence crumbled in an instant, replaced by the old shame, the old certainty that she was too much, too large, too wrong to deserve kindness or respect or the quiet companionship of a good man. I should finish dinner, Clara whispered. Of course. I've taken up enough of your time. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Clara? That's your name, isn't it? I'd hate for you to get the wrong idea about Silas's attentions. He's always been soft-hearted about charity cases. It's one of his weaknesses. But sentiment only goes so far, especially when more suitable options present themselves. She left in a rustle of expensive fabric, and Clara stood alone in her kitchen, knife gripped in her white-knuckled hand, fighting tears. Dinner was burned. Not completely ruined, but close. The roast overdone, the potatoes scorched at the bottom, the gravy lumpy. Clara served it anyway, unable to meet anyone's eyes, feeling like a failure for the first time in months. The men ate without complaint, but she saw their concerned glances. Saw Danny open his mouth to say something, then close it again when Thompson shook his head in warning. Silas came to the kitchen after the men had left. Eleanor was upstairs, preparing for bed in the guest room that had once felt like Clara's private domain. Now it felt invaded, contaminated by perfume and silk and casual cruelty. Dinner was good, Silas said. Clara kept scrubbing the same pot, unable to stop even though it was already clean. It was burned. It was fine. It wasn't. I let it overcook. I wasn't paying attention. Silas was quiet for a moment. Eleanor said something to you. It wasn't a question. Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. What did she say? Silas's voice was harder now. Nothing that wasn't true. Clara, she's right. The words burst out before Clara could stop them. About all of it, I am a charity case. You did hire me out of pity, and I have been fooling myself thinking I belonged here, thinking I was anything more than... Stop! Silas crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and took her shoulders, turning her to face him. His scarred face was fierce. Whatever she said to you, it was poison. Eleanor's good at that, finding people's weak spots and pressing until they break. But that doesn't make her words true. She said you're soft-hearted about charity cases, Clara whispered, that you always have been, that it's your weakness. And you believed her? Why wouldn't I? Clara's voice cracked. Mr. Boone, look at me. Really look. I'm not stupid. I know what I am. I know why you hired me, because you felt sorry for me, because you wanted to help someone nobody else would help. That's kind of you. It is, but it's not... She stopped, unable to finish. It's not what? Silas's hands were still on her shoulders, steady and warm. It's not real, Clara finished quietly. This whole thing, the job, the respect, the friendship, it only works because we're isolated here, because there's nobody else. But Eleanor's here now, and she's beautiful and sophisticated and everything I'm not, and suddenly I can see how ridiculous this all is. How ridiculous I've been thinking I could actually... She broke off, horrified at what she'd almost said. Thinking she could actually matter to him. Thinking she could actually deserve his time and attention and those quiet evenings washing dishes. Silas's expression shifted to something Clara had never seen before. Something almost like anger, but directed at himself. I'm going to tell you something, he said roughly, and you're going to listen, because I'm only saying it once. Clara nodded, unable to speak. Eleanor left me when I lost everything. Not when the ranch was struggling, when it had actually failed. When I was sleeping in the barn because I couldn't afford to heat the house. When I was eating one meal a day and working 20 hours just to keep from losing the land completely. His voice was harsh with memory. She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because I stopped being useful to her. Because poverty isn't beautiful or romantic, and she couldn't stand being associated with failure. Clara's throat tightened. I hired you because I needed a cook, Silas continued. Not because I felt sorry for you, because I needed someone who could do the job, and you could do it better than anyone. Everything since then, the respect, the friendship, the fact that I trust you more than half my ranch hands, that's because of who you are, not because I pity you. But she's nothing, Silas interrupted flatly. Eleanor is a beautiful shell with nothing inside worth keeping. You think I can't see that now? After 3 months of watching you work yourself to exhaustion to keep this ranch fed? After watching you save a child's life in a blizzard? After seeing you stand up to men twice your size and dump stew on their heads when they acted like fools? Despite everything, Clara felt a small laugh escape. Eleanor called you a charity case, Silas said, his voice softer now. You want to know what you actually are? You're the best cook in 3 counties. You're brave enough to take chances most people wouldn't risk. You're kind to people who don't deserve it, and you're stubborn as hell, which is the only reason you're still standing here instead of running back to Red Hollow. His hand slid from her shoulders to her arms, warm and solid. That's not charity. That's not pity. That's me recognizing quality when I see it. Clara looked up at him, searching his scarred face for the lie, the polite fiction. But she only saw honesty, fierce and unflinching. Why is she here? The question came out small and scared. Silas's jaw tightened. Because her banker husband lost his fortune worse than I ever did. Because she's looking for a safe harbor and remembered I'm too stupid to hold grudges, he paused. She asked me to marry her. Clara's heart stopped. What? Yesterday. Said we'd wasted enough time, that we belonged together, that she'd made a mistake leaving. Silas's expression was grim. She apologized very prettily, said all the right things, made it clear she was willing to overlook my rough years if I was willing to forget her leaving. And what did you say? Clara barely breathed the words. I said no. The relief that flooded through Clara was so intense it made her dizzy. You did. I told her I wasn't interested in marrying someone who only valued me when I had money. I told her the ranch wasn't a safety net for her next disaster, and I told her she could stay until the roads were passable, but after that she needed to leave and not come back. Silas stepped closer, and Clara could smell leather and wood smoke, familiar and solid. You want to know why I really said no? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Because I spent 3 months washing dishes with someone who never asked me for anything except the chance to work. Someone who didn't care about my money or my property or my reputation. Someone who just showed up every day and did the job and made this place feel less empty. His voice dropped lower. And I realized I'd rather have that real and quiet and earned than all of Eleanor's pretty promises. The kitchen was silent except for Clara's ragged breathing. I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable, Silas continued. I'm saying it because Eleanor came here to poison you against yourself, and I won't let that stand. You matter here, not as charity, not as pity. You matter because you've earned it. I don't know what to say, Clara whispered. Then don't say anything. Just stop believing her poison over my truth. He released her arms and stepped back, and Clara felt the absence of his warmth like a physical loss. But his eyes stayed on hers, steady and sure, until she finally nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Good. Silas picked up a dish towel. Now let's finish these dishes before I lose my patience completely and throw Eleanor out tonight instead of waiting for the roads to clear. They washed in silence, but it was different now, charged with something Clara didn't have words for. Every time their hands brushed in the wash water, she felt electricity. Every time she glanced up and found him watching her, her heart stuttered. This was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. Silas Boone was her employer, her protection, the reason she had a roof over her head and food in her stomach. Getting confused about the nature of their relationship was the fastest way to ruin everything she'd built here. But her heart didn't seem to care about logic. Eleanor left 2 days later, her departure as dramatic as her arrival. She descended the stairs in another expensive dress, carrying herself like a queen in exile, and gave Silas one last chance to change his mind. "You're making a mistake," she said, standing in the doorway of the main house. "We were good together once. We could be again." "We were never good together," Silas replied calmly. "We were just useful to each other. That's not the same thing." Eleanor's eyes flashed to where Clara stood in the kitchen doorway watching. "And her? Is she useful to you?" "She's essential," Silas said flatly, "which you'd understand if you knew the difference between using people and valuing them." Eleanor's face hardened into something ugly. She looked at Clara with pure venom. "You think you've won something," she said softly. "You think because he defended you, because he washes dishes like a housemaid, that means something. But men like Silas don't end up with women like you. Not permanently. Not when better options present themselves." "Eleanor," Silas's voice cracked like a whip. "Leave. Now." "I'm going." She climbed into her carriage, then leaned out the window for one last strike. "But mark my words, girl. When he gets tired of playing savior, when the novelty wears off and he remembers what he could have, you'll be right back in that freezing cabin wondering how you ever fooled yourself into thinking you belonged." The carriage pulled away, and Clara stood frozen, Eleanor's words echoing in her head. Silas crossed the yard to where Clara stood. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't believe a word she said. She's bitter and cruel, and she wanted to hurt you because she couldn't hurt me." "Maybe she's right, though." Clara's voice was barely audible. "Maybe I'm fooling myself." "About what?" "About deserving this. Any of this." Clara gestured helplessly at the ranch, the kitchen, him. "I'm not like her. I'll never be like her. And eventually you'll—" "I'll what?" Silas stepped closer, his expression fierce. "Wake up one day and realize I made a mistake? Decide I want someone who abandoned me instead of someone who stayed? Clara, look at me." She did reluctantly. "Eleanor is my past," Silas said, each word deliberate. "A mistake I made when I was young and stupid enough to think beauty meant anything. You are—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "You're different, and not in the ways she tried to make you think." "How then?" Clara whispered. "You're real," Silas said simply. "Everything about you is real. Your kindness, your strength, your cooking, your courage. Eleanor was always performing, always calculating, but you just are. And that's worth more than all her polish." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. But Eleanor's poison had found all her old wounds and reopened them. "I need to start dinner," she said instead of responding. "The men will be hungry." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded and stepped back. "All right. But Clara, this conversation isn't over." He walked away, and Clara went back to her kitchen, trying to ignore the way her heart was beating too fast, and her hands were shaking with something that wasn't fear. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Silas's words, Eleanor's cruelty, the way Silas had looked at her when he said she was essential. Essential, not tolerated, not pitied, essential. Clara rolled over and pressed her face into her pillow, trying to make sense of the emotions churning through her. For 3 months, she'd been building a life here, finding her place, earning respect. But she'd carefully kept her heart separate from it all, protecting herself from hoping for more than employment and basic human dignity. Now that careful separation was crumbling, and Clara didn't know how to stop it. She didn't know if she wanted to stop it. The next few days were strange. The men sensed the tension but didn't know its source. They worked harder, ate faster, gave Clara and Silas space when they were in the same room. Danny stopped telling jokes. Mills stopped asking for seconds. Even Jack seemed subdued, moving through his duties with unusual quiet. Clara cooked mechanically, going through the motions. The food was good. She couldn't help that. Cooking was as natural as breathing. But her heart wasn't in it. She kept hearing Eleanor's voice, kept seeing her beautiful face twisted with contempt. When he gets tired of playing savior... On the 5th day after Eleanor's departure, Clara was preparing bread dough when Silas entered the kitchen. It was mid-afternoon, an unusual time for him to be in the house. "Can we talk?" he asked. Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "About what?" About you avoiding me for the past week. I'm not avoiding you. You haven't said more than 5 words to me since Eleanor left. You disappear to your room immediately after dinner. You won't look at me. Silas's voice was carefully neutral. If that's not avoiding, what is it? Clara turned back to her dough, kneading harder than necessary. I'm just doing my job. Your job includes conversation during dishwashing. We had an arrangement. Maybe that arrangement was a mistake. The words came out sharper than she intended. Silas went very still behind her. Why would it be a mistake? Because every evening spent beside you makes it harder to remember. This is just employment, Clara thought. Because I'm starting to care about you in ways that will destroy me when you realize Eleanor was right. Because it's inappropriate, she said instead. You're the ranch owner. I'm the cook. There should be boundaries. There are boundaries. We wash dishes and talk. That's not inappropriate. Eleanor thought it was. Eleanor thought a lot of things. Most of them were wrong. Silas moved closer, and Clara could feel his presence behind her even though he didn't touch her. Clara, what did she say to you, really say, when you were alone? Clara's hand stilled in the dough. It doesn't matter. It does if it's making you pull away from the one friendship you have on this ranch. Friendship. The word was both comfort and knife wound. She said you'd get tired of playing savior, that men like you don't end up with women like me. End up with? Silas's voice was careful. Clara's face burned. She was implying. I don't know what she meant. I think you do. The silence stretched between them, tight and fragile. Clara kept her eyes on the dough, unable to look at him. She meant you'd never see me as anything but your cook, Clara finally whispered. That I was fooling myself thinking the respect and friendship meant anything more. That eventually you'd remember what you could have and realize I'm not. Her voice broke. That I'm not enough. Silas was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might leave without responding. Then she felt his hand on her shoulder, warm and solid, stopping her nervous kneading. Turn around, he said softly. I'm covered in flour. I don't care. Turn around. Clara did reluctantly, keeping her eyes down. Silas's hand moved from her shoulder to her chin, tilting her face up until she had to look at him. His expression was intense, almost fierce. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Clara couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I see someone who's never had a fair chance at anything and still managed to become more decent than most people who've had everything handed to them. I see someone strong enough to leave the only home they knew because staying meant dying slowly. I see someone brave enough to walk into a kitchen full of hostile men and win them over with nothing but good food and stubborn dignity. His thumb brushed her cheek, and Clara realized she was crying. I see someone who saved a child's life without thinking about the cost. Someone who dumped stew on fighting cowboys and made them apologize. Someone who works harder than anyone I've ever met and never complains about it. Silas's voice dropped lower. And yeah, I see someone who makes me want to wash dishes every night just to spend time with them. Silas. His name slipped out before Clara could stop it, the first time she'd used it without the formal Mr. I'm not good at this, Silas continued, his hand still cupping her face. I'm rough and scarred, and I spent too many years alone to remember how to talk pretty. But I need you to know you're not my charity case. You're not my good deed. You're becoming something I don't have words for yet. Clara's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I don't understand. Neither do I. But I know I look forward to our evenings in this kitchen more than anything else in my day. I know I'd rather talk to you about nothing than sit in silence anywhere else. And I know that when Eleanor asked me to marry her, the only thing I felt was relief that I could say no. Because she left you. Because she isn't you. The words hung in the flowery air between them, impossible and terrifying and real. I'm scared, Clara whispered. Of what? Of this. Of hoping. Of believing that someone like you could actually... She stopped, unable to finish. Could actually what? Care about you? Value you? Silas's thumb traced her cheekbone gently. Clara, I already do. Have been for weeks. I thought you knew. I didn't. I don't... Clara's voice broke completely. I don't know how to do this. I've never... Nobody's ever... Neither have I. Not really. Eleanor wasn't this. This is. Silas seemed to search for words. This is terrifying and real, and nothing like I expected. They stood in the kitchen, flour dust hanging in the afternoon light, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Something that felt like a door opening after being locked for 27 years. "What do we do now?" she asked. Silas smiled, a real smile, rare and transformative. "We finish making bread, we cook dinner, we wash dishes, and we stop pretending we're just employer and cook when we both know it stopped being that simple months ago." Clara felt herself smile back, tentative and scared and hopeful all at once. "Okay. Okay." Silas's hand dropped from her face, but his eyes stayed on hers. "Now let's make some bread before the men stage a revolt over missing dinner." They worked together in comfortable silence, and when their hands touched in the flour, neither pulled away. Why? The supply wagon arrived on a Tuesday morning in mid-April, and Clara knew something was wrong the moment she saw the driver's face. Sam Porter had been making the supply run from Red Hollow for 15 years, and Clara had never seen him look worried. But today his weathered face was tight with concern as he climbed down from the wagon seat, moving slower than usual. "Everything all right, Sam?" Jack asked, already moving to help unload. "Depends on your definition." Sam pulled off his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Got your supplies, but I'm not feeling so good. Probably just a spring cold, but I've been running a fever since yesterday." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. "You should have stayed in town and sent someone else." "Couldn't. Half of Red Hollow's sick with something. Started about a week ago. Fever, chills, gut troubles. Doc says it's probably from bad water in the south well." Sam coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I figured I was fine since I don't drink from that well, but guess I caught it anyway." "Half the town?" Jack's voice was sharp. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Old Mrs. Henderson died 3 days ago. The Fletcher boy's in rough shape. Doc's overwhelmed." Sam started unloading crates, then swayed slightly. "Sorry, just dizzy spell." "Stop," Clara ordered, moving forward. "Jack, get him inside. He needs to lie down." "I'm fine, just need—" Sam's protest ended when his knees buckled. Jack caught him before he hit the ground. They carried him to the bunkhouse and Clara followed with blankets and water. Sam's skin was burning up, his breathing labored. She'd seen sickness before, but this felt different, worse. "We need to keep him isolated," she said quietly to Jack. "Whatever he has, we don't want it spreading." "Might be too late for that." Jack's expression was grim. He was handling the supplies. Everything in that wagon could be contaminated. Clara's mind raced. 20 men on this ranch? If they all got sick at once, there'd be no one to work, no one to care for the animals, no one to keep the place running. And if it killed Mrs. Henderson, an otherwise healthy woman in her 50s, "We'll burn the packaging," she decided. "Transfer everything to clean containers. Wash our hands with lye soap before touching anything. And we pray it's not too late." But it was too late. 2 days later, Mills collapsed during breakfast. Then Thompson started vomiting after lunch. By nightfall, 5 more men were down with fever and chills. Clara moved through the crisis like she was underwater, everything happening too fast and too slow at once. She boiled water, made broth, distributed blankets. She remembered the herbs Running Deer's father had given her and brewed them into tea, praying they'd help. She organized the healthy men into shifts, some caring for the sick, others maintaining essential ranch work. Silas worked beside her through it all, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. They barely spoke except to coordinate care, but Clara felt his presence like an anchor in the storm. On the 3rd day, Danny got sick. Then Jack. Clara found Jack in the bunkhouse, shaking so hard his teeth rattled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I tried to fight it." "Hush," Clara said, pressing a cool cloth to his burning forehead. "You have nothing to apologize for. Just rest." But Jack was their foreman, their most experienced hand. Without him, coordinating the ranch work fell entirely on Silas's shoulders. And Silas was already stretched thin trying to care for the sick and keep the healthy men from panicking. By the 4th day, 12 men were down. The bunkhouse had become a makeshift hospital, and Clara spent 18 hours straight moving between beds, spooning broth into unwilling mouths, changing sweat-soaked sheets, monitoring breathing that sometimes came too shallow or too fast. She hadn't slept in 2 days. hadn't eaten a full meal in 3. Her hands were raw from washing with lye soap, her back ached from bending over sick beds, and her eyes burned with exhaustion. "You need to rest," Silas said, finding her in the bunkhouse at midnight. "You're going to collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground." He took the water bucket from her hands. "Go to bed. I'll take over." "You haven't slept either." "I'll sleep when this is over." Silas's face was haggard in the lamplight, shadows carving deep lines around his eyes. "Please, Clara, just a few hours." Clara wanted to argue, but her legs were shaking and her vision kept blurring at the edges. "Wake me if anyone gets worse." "I will." She made it to her room and collapsed on the bed, fully clothed. Sleep took her instantly, black and dreamless. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Silas stood over her, his expression grim. "It's Danny," he said quietly. "He's asking for you." Clara was on her feet before her brain fully processed the words. She followed Silas to the bunkhouse, where Danny lay in his cot looking impossibly young and fragile. His freckles stood out stark against skin that had gone grayish-white. "Hey," he whispered when Clara knelt beside him. "Sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me." Clara pressed her hand to his forehead, still burning. "How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a horse." Danny tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Listen, if this doesn't... Stop that. You're going to be fine. But if I'm not..." Danny's hand found hers, weak and trembling. "Tell my ma I'm sorry I didn't write more. Tell her I thought about her all the time." Clara's throat closed. "You'll tell her yourself. Promise me." Danny's eyes were fever-bright and desperate. "Please." "I promise," Clara whispered. "But you're going to be fine. You hear me? You're young and strong, and I didn't spend 3 months perfecting your burned cornbread just to lose you now." Danny laughed, a wet sound that turned into coughing. Clara held him while he shook, feeling how thin he'd gotten in just a few days, how the sickness was eating him from the inside. When the coughing finally stopped, Danny slumped back against his pillow, exhausted. "Thanks for the cornbread," he murmured. "Best I ever had." Clara sat with him until he fell asleep, then stood on trembling legs and walked outside. The night air was cool and clean, and she sucked it in desperately, trying not to think about Danny's mother receiving news of her son's death, trying not to imagine writing that letter. Silas found her leaning against the barn wall, silent tears streaming down her face. "He's not going to die," Silas said firmly. "You don't know that." "I know you won't let him." Silas pulled her against his chest, and Clara collapsed into him, letting him hold her weight. "You've kept 12 men alive for 4 days. You fought this thing with everything you have. Danny's gonna make it because you're too stubborn to let him go." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to have his certainty, but she'd seen how fast the sickness could turn, how quickly strong men could become weak shadows of themselves. "I'm scared," she admitted into his shirt. "I know, so am I." Silas's arms tightened around her. "But we're going to get through this, all of us." The next 3 days were hell. More men fell sick, 15 total now, with only 5 still healthy enough to work. The ranch was barely functioning. Animals got fed late or not at all. Chores piled up. And in the bunkhouse, the sick got sicker. Clara stopped sleeping entirely. She moved through the hours in a haze of exhaustion, brewing herbs, forcing broth down resistant throats, changing sheets, monitoring symptoms. She used every bit of knowledge she'd accumulated over 27 years of taking care of herself. Folk remedies her mother had taught her, tricks she'd learned from necessity, and desperate prayers to anything that might be listening. The herbs Running Deer's father had given her became invaluable. She brewed them into strong tea that seemed to ease the worst of the fever. It didn't cure the sickness, but it bought time, and time was all they had. Mills took a turn for the worse on the 6th day. His fever spiked so high he started hallucinating, thrashing in his cot, and crying out for his mother. It took 3 men to hold him down while Clara forced cold cloths on his burning skin, trying to bring the fever down before it killed him. "He's not going to make it," one of the healthy cowboys said, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "We should, I don't know, say something, prepare." "No," Clara said flatly. "We don't give up. Not on Mills, not on any of them." She stayed with Mills through the night, replacing cold cloths every few minutes, spooning water between his cracked lips, talking to him even though he didn't seem to hear. She told him about his sister waiting for that cornbread recipe, reminded him that he hadn't finished teaching her to sharpen knives properly, made up stories about the meals she'd cook when he was better. Somewhere around dawn, the fever broke. Mills opened his eyes, looked at Clara with recognition, and whispered, "Water?" Clara nearly sobbed with relief, but if Mills was improving, others were getting worse. Thompson's cough turned bloody. Sam Porter, the supply wagon driver who'd brought the sickness in the first place, barely had the strength to lift his head. Jack's breathing grew labored and shallow. Clara moved between them all, triaging care, making impossible decisions about who needed attention most urgently. She felt like she was playing a terrible game where every choice might mean life or death. On the 7th day, she walked into the main house kitchen to prepare more broth and found Silas slumped over the table. "Silas?" Her voice came out sharp with panic. He lifted his head slowly, and Clara saw the glassy shine of fever in his eyes. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was rough, and his hands shook as he tried to stand. "Just tired." "You're sick." Clara crossed to him, pressing her hand to his forehead, burning up. "How long?" "Since last night. It's not bad yet. You can still nothing." Claire's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "You're going to bed now." "Clara, there's too much to do. The ranch—" "Yes, sir?" "The ranch can burn for all I care if you die." The words burst out before she could stop them, raw and desperate. "You're going to bed, and you're going to rest, and you're going to let me take care of you like you've been taking care of everyone else." Silas stared at her, seeming to really see her for the first time in days. He saw the exhaustion carved into every line of her face, the trembling in her hands, the desperation in her eyes. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." Clara got him upstairs to his room, the first time she'd been in it, and into bed. His fever was high, but not dangerously so yet. She brought cold water and cloths, the herbal tea, what little broth was left. "You're going to be okay," she said, more to herself than to him. "You have to be okay." "I will be." Silas caught her hand as she pressed a cloth to his forehead. "You won't let me die. You're too stubborn." Clara almost laughed. "That's what you told me about Danny." "Was I wrong?" "Danny's still alive, barely, but alive." She smoothed the cloth across Silas's burning skin. "You're all alive, all 15 of you. Nobody's died yet." "Because of you." "I'm just cooking broth and changing sheets." "You're fighting a plague with nothing but herbs and stubbornness," Silas corrected, his eyes drifting closed. "You're saving lives. You're saving my ranch. You're saving me." "Rest," Clara whispered. "Please just rest." She stayed with him until he fell asleep, then forced herself back downstairs. The healthy men needed direction. The sick needed care. The ranch needed to keep functioning somehow. But now every step felt like walking through mud. Her vision kept tunneling at the edges. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd pushed herself too hard for too long, and her body was starting to shut down whether she wanted it to or not. Clara made it to the bunkhouse, checked on Danny and Mills and Thompson, distributed what little medicine remained. Then she stepped outside for fresh air, and the world tilted sideways. She felt herself falling, felt the ground rushing up to meet her, and thought distantly that this was a stupid time to collapse. Too much left to do. Too many people depending on her. Strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt. "I've got you," a voice said. "Thompson?" No, his voice was rougher. "Mills, then." "Easy now. When's the last time you ate?" Clara tried to answer but couldn't remember. "Yesterday? The day before?" "Someone get water," Mills called out. "And tell the boss—" "Wait, the boss is sick too, isn't he? Damn it." They carried her inside, and Clara tried to protest, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Someone spooned broth into her mouth, her own broth, still warm. Someone else brought blankets. Through the haze, she heard voices. She's been running on nothing for a week. Didn't even stop to eat her own cooking. Probably saved half our lives and forgot to save herself. Well, she's resting now whether she likes it or not. Clara wanted to argue that she couldn't rest, that there was too much work, too many sick people. But exhaustion dragged her under like a tide, and she surrendered to it. She woke in her own bed 12 hours later, disoriented and confused. Sunlight streamed through the window. Afternoon light, which meant she'd slept through the night and half the next day. She sat up too fast, head spinning, and heard movement in the hallway. Danny appeared in her doorway. He looked like hell. Too thin, too pale, still weak. But he was standing, alive. "You're awake," he said, relief clear in his voice. "Good. Mills said to tell you when you woke up." "I shouldn't be sleeping. The sick are being taken care of. Mills is up now, and Thompson's fever broke this morning. We've got it handled." Danny moved into the room carrying a tray. "You're supposed to eat this and rest more." Clara looked at the tray. Bread and butter, cold chicken, apple slices, coffee. "I need to check on Silas. Boss is sleeping. His fever came down overnight. Mills checked on him an hour ago." Danny set the tray on her bedside table. "Everyone's improving. Turns out that tea you've been forcing down our throats actually works." "The herbs," Clara murmured. "Running Deer's father said they were for healing." "Well, they're working. Sam Porter's sitting up today. Jack's breathing easier. Even Thompson stopped coughing blood." Danny smiled, still weak but genuine. "We're going to make it, all of us, because of you." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I just did what anyone would." "No," Danny interrupted firmly. "You did what no one else could. You kept 15 men alive through something that killed people in town. You pushed yourself past exhaustion, past reason, because you wouldn't let us die. That's not what anyone would do. That's what you did." He left before Clara could respond, and she sat alone in her room, staring at the food she couldn't quite bring herself to eat yet. Her body ached, her hands still shook. But everyone was alive, improving. They'd made it through. She ate mechanically, forcing down food her stomach didn't want, knowing she needed the strength. Then she washed her face, braided her hair, and went to check on Silas. He was asleep when she entered his room, looking less fevered than the night before. Clara sat in the chair beside his bed and watched him breathe, counting each rise and fall of his chest like proof of life. After a while, his eyes opened. They were clear, focused, the fever glaze gone. "Hey," he said, his voice rough but stronger. "You're supposed to be resting." "So are you." "I am resting." Silas shifted slightly, wincing. "Everything hurts. That's the fever breaking. It'll pass." Clara reached for the water cup on the bedside table. "Drink this." He did, obediently, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. He was going to be okay. They were all going to be okay. "You collapsed," Silas said when he'd finished the water. "I'm fine now." Clara, I'm fine," she repeated more firmly. "Everyone's fine. That's what matters." Silas studied her face for a long moment. "You scared me. Mills came to tell me you'd fallen, and I couldn't even get out of bed to check on you. Couldn't do anything except lie here and worry." "Well, now you know how I felt watching you get sick." Clara set down the water cup. "Terrifying, isn't it? Worse than terrifying." Silas's hand found hers, his grip weak but sure. "I've been in gunfights that scared me less." They sat in silence for a while, hands linked, both too exhausted for more words. Outside, Clara could hear the ranch slowly coming back to life. Men's voices, animals moving in the corrals, the familiar sounds of work resuming. "We should talk," Silas said finally, "about what happens now. Now you rest. Everyone rests. We recover." "I meant about us." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "About what I said before. About you not being just my cook." Clara's breath caught. In the chaos of the sickness, she'd almost forgotten that conversation in the kitchen, almost convinced herself she'd imagined the tenderness in his voice, the warmth in his eyes. "We don't have to talk about that now," she said quietly. "You're still recovering, which is exactly when I want to talk about it, when my brain's too tired to lie." Silas shifted, trying to sit up, and Clara helped arrange pillows behind him. "I meant what I said, every word. And this past week, watching you fight for these men's lives, watching you sacrifice everything to keep them alive. Clara, you're the strongest person I've ever known." "I'm not strong. I was terrified the entire time." "Being terrified and doing it anyway is what courage looks like." Silas squeezed her hand. "You saved this ranch, saved me. And I need you to know that when I'm recovered, when things are back to normal, I'm going to court you properly." Clara stared at him. Court me? If you'll let me. I know I'm not much of a prize, scarred and stubborn and too old to have much romance left in me, but I'd like to try. With you. Silas, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. I've wanted to since before Eleanor showed up and poisoned your head with lies. I just didn't know how to say it. Didn't know if you'd want someone like me. Someone like you? Clara almost laughed. You're the best man I've ever met. Then say yes. Say you'll let me try to deserve you. Clara looked at their joined hands, at Silas's scarred face turned toward her with painful hope, at the room where she'd spent the last day keeping him alive through sheer will. She thought about Eleanor's cruel words, about her own lifetime of believing she wasn't enough. But Silas Boone was looking at her like she'd hung the stars, like she was everything he'd been searching for, like she was enough exactly as she was. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes. Silas smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made him look years younger. Good. Now go rest before you collapse again. We can figure out the details when we're both recovered. Bossy, Clara said, but she was smiling too. You've been giving orders for a week. It's my turn. Silas released her hand reluctantly. Go, sleep, eat something. Take care of yourself for once. Clara stood but paused at the door. Silas? Yeah? Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for fighting Eleanor's poison with truth. Her voice caught. For choosing me. Clara, Silas said softly. I didn't choose you. I recognized you. There's a difference. She left before she started crying, walking down the hallway with her heart too full for her chest to contain. Behind her, she heard Silas settle back into his pillows, and ahead of her she heard the ranch coming back to life. They'd survived. All of them. Together. The recovery was slow but steady. Over the next 2 weeks, the sick men gradually regained their strength. The healthy ones picked up the slack, working double shifts to keep the ranch running. And Clara cooked, nurturing meals designed to rebuild strength, to heal, to remind everyone that life was worth living. Mills was the first back to full work, stubbornly refusing to rest longer than absolutely necessary. Thompson followed, then Danny, then the others in a slow trickle. Jack took longest, his breathing still labored from the infection, but eventually even he returned to his duties as foreman. Sam Porter stayed an extra week, too weak to make the journey back to Red Hollow. When he finally left, he pressed coins into Clara's hand despite her protests. You saved my life, he said simply. This doesn't cover the debt, but it's a start. Word spread. Other ranches had lost men to the sickness. Red Hollow had buried 7 people. But Boone Ranch hadn't lost a single soul, and people wanted to know why. The answer, whispered from ranch to ranch and town to town, was always the same. The cook. That woman from Red Hollow who nobody wanted. She'd fought the sickness with herbs and determination and refused to let anyone die. Clara Whitmore, the woman everyone had mocked, had become something else entirely. She'd become essential. The first traveler arrived in late May, when spring had finally won its war against winter, and the Wyoming landscape had turned from white to impossible green. Clara was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard horses in the yard, more than the usual ranch sounds. She looked out the window and saw a family, mother, father, 3 children, their wagon dusty from travel. Silas met them outside, and Clara watched through the glass as he spoke with the father. After a moment, Silas gestured toward the main house, and the family's faces lit up with relief. He brought them to the kitchen door. Clara, this is the Morrison family. They're heading north to Montana Territory. Heard about your cooking from Sam Porter in Red Hollow. Silas looked almost embarrassed. They're asking if they could buy a meal before continuing their journey. Clara stared at the family. Oh, the children's hungry faces, the mother's exhausted eyes, the father's weathered hope. Of course. Give me an hour. She cooked like she was feeding her own. Roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread, vegetables and butter, apple pie from her carefully hoarded dried fruit. The family ate at the long table, usually reserved for ranch hands, and Clara watched the youngest child, a girl maybe 5 years old, close her eyes in pure bliss at her first bite of pie. Ma'am, the father said when they'd finished, pulling out coins. How much do we owe you? Clara looked at the coins, then at the children. 4 bits, the mother gasped. That's too little for all this food. 4 bits, Clara repeated firmly, and you take the rest of the pie for your journey. The family left an hour later, the children waving from the wagon, the mother clutching the wrapped pie like treasure. The father had pressed 6 bits into Clara's hand despite her protests, and she'd tucked the extra coins into the jar she was slowly filling for winter supplies. 2 days later, another family came. Then a lone cowboy heading east. Then 3 trappers who'd heard about the ranch where the cook could heal sickness and make food that tasted like home. Within a month, they were feeding travelers almost daily. "We should charge more," Silas said one evening, watching Clara count the coins from that day's visitors. "You're working twice as hard now." They're already paying what they can afford. Clara set aside money for supplies, added the rest to the winter jar. Besides, most of them just need kindness more than they need food. Silas was quiet for a moment. "You realize what you're building here, don't you?" "I'm just cooking. You're creating something bigger than that." He moved closer, his hand finding hers on the table. They'd been cautious since his recovery, taking things slow despite the promise they'd made to each other. "Court you properly," he'd said, and he'd meant it. Walking with her after dinner, helping in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing while the ranch settled into evening quiet. But they hadn't talked about the future. Not really. Not beyond vague acknowledgments that something was growing between them. "What if we made it official?" Silas asked now. Clara's heart stuttered. "Made what official?" "The meals for travelers. We could build a proper dining hall, separate from the bunkhouse, set hours for service, make it a real business, not just charity." He was talking faster now, excitement creeping into his usually measured voice. "You'd run it, make your own decisions about menu and pricing, keep the profits." "Silas, I can't." "Why not? You're already doing the work. This would just legitimize it, give you independence." He squeezed her hand. "Give you something that's yours, not just employment." Clara's throat tightened. "You do that? Build a whole dining hall just so I could—" "I'd build you a palace if you asked," Silas interrupted quietly. "A dining hall is the least I can do." The words hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said yet. Clara looked at their joined hands, at Silas's scarred face turned toward her with that painful honesty she'd come to treasure. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's do it." Construction started in June. Silas hired workers from Red Hollow, and Clara watched in amazement as a building took shape next to the main ranch house. Not huge, maybe room for 30 people at most, but solid and real and hers. The ranch hands helped in their off hours, and Clara noticed how their attitudes had completely transformed. Mills consulted her on window placement. Thompson built her a custom serving counter. Danny carved decorative details into the doorframe. Even Jack, still recovering his full strength, supervised the work with careful attention to Clara's preferences. "You want the stove here or here?" Mills asked one afternoon, gesturing at 2 different wall positions. Clara studied the space, imagining workflow, heat distribution, efficiency. "There, closer to the serving counter, but with ventilation to the outside." "You heard her?" Mills called to the workers. "Stove goes on the east wall." No one questioned her decision. No one made jokes about her authority. Clara was in charge, and they accepted it as naturally as they accepted sunrise. Word spread faster than Clara expected. By July, travelers were arriving specifically to eat at Boone Ranch before the dining hall was even finished. Clara cooked in the main house kitchen and served meals at outdoor tables, and people paid willingly, gratefully, spreading word of the woman who could make food taste like love. Red Hollow noticed. Mrs. Henderson's daughter came one afternoon, embarrassed and hesitant. "I heard you might need help," she said quietly. "With the new dining hall, I can cook some. Not like you, but I can help with prep work, cleaning, whatever you need." Clara remembered Mrs. Henderson's reluctant charity, the way she'd looked at Clara with pity and disgust. But the daughter wasn't her mother, and everyone deserved a fair chance. "Can you start tomorrow?" Clara asked. The girl's face lit up. "Really? You'd hire me?" "If you work hard and don't mind taking direction, yes." Sarah Miller came next. The same Sarah who'd giggled when her mother mocked Clara outside the general store. She stood in the kitchen doorway, face red with shame, and couldn't meet Clara's eyes. "I know I don't deserve to ask," Sarah said quietly. I know I was cruel. I was stupid and mean, and I'm sorry, but I need work. And I heard you give people chances. Clara studied the girl she'd once played with before the world taught them they couldn't be friends. She could refuse, could turn Sarah away and it would be justified, deserved even. But Clara remembered being 27 and desperate, standing in her freezing cabin with no prospects and no hope. Remembered Silas giving her a chance when no one else would. You'd be working for me, Clara said firmly, taking my orders, doing things my way. Can you handle that? Yes, Sarah whispered. Yes, I can. Then show up tomorrow at dawn. We'll see if you mean it. By August, Clara had a staff of 4 women from Red Hollow, all of them eager to learn, to work, to be part of something that was becoming legendary across the territory. The dining hall was nearly complete, and Silas was already talking about expansion. We could add rooms, he said one evening, sketching plans on paper. For travelers who need lodging, make it a proper way station. That's a lot of money, Clara said carefully. It's an investment. You're feeding 50 people a week now, and that's just with outdoor tables and limited space. Once the hall opens, he looked up at her, eyes bright with possibilities. Clara, you're building something important here, something that helps people. I want to support that. Why? The question came out softer than she intended. Why are you doing all this for me? Silas set down his pencil. You really have to ask? It's a lot. The dining hall, the staff, the supplies. It's more than you deserve. Silas's voice was gentle but firm. Stop finishing sentences that way. You've earned every bit of this. Earned it by feeding this ranch through winter, by saving lives during the sickness, by creating something from nothing through sheer stubbornness and skill. He stood and crossed to where Clara sat, taking her hands and pulling her to her feet. They were alone in the kitchen, the evening light turning everything golden, and Clara's heart was beating too fast. I'm doing this because I love you, Silas said simply. I've loved you since you dumped Stu on fighting cowboys. Maybe even before that. And watching you build this dream, watching you give other women the chances no one gave you, watching you turn cruelty into kindness every single day, it just makes me love you more. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. You love me? Is that really surprising? Yes, Clara whispered. Yes, it's surprising. I'm not. Old habits died hard. I'm not the kind of woman men love. You're the only kind of woman I could love, Silas corrected. The real kind, the strong kind, the kind who doesn't quit even when the world tries to break her. His hands tightened on hers. I know I'm not good with words. I know I'm rough and scarred and probably not what you dreamed about when you were young. But I'm asking anyway. Asking if you'd consider building this future with me. Not as my cook, not as my employee, as my wife. The world seemed to stop spinning. Clara stared at Silas, at his scarred face and honest eyes and work-roughened hands holding hers so carefully, and felt something inside her finally, completely break open. I dreamed about being invisible, she said, and her voice was shaking. When I was young, I dreamed about being small enough that people would stop noticing me, stop mocking me, stop looking at me like I was a mistake that needed correcting. Tears were streaming down her face now. I never dreamed anyone would love me. Never thought I deserved that. Clara, but you make me feel like I deserve everything, she continued, the words pouring out. Like I'm not too much, like I'm exactly enough. You defended me when I couldn't defend myself. You built me a dining hall when I only asked to cook. You loved me when the whole world said I was unlovable. She was sobbing now, 27 years of pain and loneliness and shame finally breaking free. So yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build this future with you. Yes to everything. Silas pulled her against his chest and held her while she cried, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but felt in her bones. When the tears finally stopped, Clara pulled back just enough to look at him. I love you too, she said. I've been too scared to say it, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me. Silas smiled, that rare, beautiful smile, and kissed her forehead gently. Then we'll be terrified together. They married in September when the dining hall was finally complete and autumn was painting the landscape in gold and red. There was no church ceremony, no formal announcement, just Silas and Clara standing before a traveling judge with the ranch hands and dining hall staff as witnesses, promising to build a life together. Clara wore a new dress, the first one she'd ever owned that was made specifically for her, fitted by Sarah Miller, who turned out to have surprising skill with a needle. It was simple blue cotton, nothing fancy, but it made Clara feel beautiful in a way she'd never experienced. "You look perfect," Silas said when he saw her, and Clara believed him. The celebration was held in the new dining hall, and Clara cooked the wedding feast herself despite protests from her staff. She made all the dishes that had become her signature: cornbread with honey butter, beef stew with dark gravy, roasted chicken with herbs, apple pie that made grown men cry with nostalgia. The ranch hands ate and laughed and told embarrassing stories about Silas that made Clara giggle into her coffee. Danny toasted to "the woman who saved all our sorry lives and then married the boss anyway." Mills presented them with a hand-carved wooden sign reading Iron Hearth, a name he'd come up with for the dining hall, and Clara loved it immediately. Travelers who'd stopped for the night joined the celebration, and soon the dining hall was packed with people dancing and singing and celebrating two people who'd found each other against all odds. Late in the evening, Jack pulled Clara aside. His breathing was still labored sometimes, a lasting effect of the sickness, but his eyes were clear and warm. "I remember the day you arrived," he said quietly. "Thought the boss had lost his mind, hiring someone the men would never respect. Thought you'd be gone within a week." "I almost was," Clara admitted. "But you stayed. You fought. You won them over without changing a single thing about who you are." Jack's smile was gentle. "That's what makes you remarkable. Not that you survived their cruelty, but that you refused to let it make you cruel in return." Clara felt tears prickling again. "I just did what needed doing." "No. You did what love looks like when it's real." Jack squeezed her shoulder. "You fed us when we didn't deserve it. You healed us when we couldn't heal ourselves. You showed us what kindness costs and why it's worth paying. That's why this dining hall will succeed. Because people need what you're giving them. Not just food, but proof that goodness exists." He walked away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing in her dining hall, in her new dress, surrounded by people who valued her, married to a man who loved her. It was more than she'd ever imagined possible. The first year of marriage passed in a blur of work and joy and small discoveries. Clara learned that Silas snored when he was truly exhausted, that he liked his coffee absurdly sweet but pretended he didn't, that he read cheap novels when he thought no one was watching and got embarrassed when Clara caught him. Silas learned that Clara talked to herself while cooking, carrying on full conversations with ingredients, that she cried at sunset sometimes, overwhelmed by the beauty of it, that she hoarded scraps of fabric and paper because poverty had taught her nothing was truly worthless. They learned to navigate disagreements. Silas wanted to expand faster. Clara wanted to build slowly and sustainably. He thought she worked too hard. She thought he worried too much. But they learned to compromise, to listen, to value each other's perspectives even when they disagreed. Iron Hearth thrived. By the second year, they were serving 100 travelers a week. Clara had hired 8 women from surrounding towns, all of them eager to learn her techniques, to earn honest wages, to be part of something meaningful. She taught them everything she knew, holding nothing back, and watched them grow in skill and confidence. The lodging rooms Silas had proposed were built and filled constantly. Families planning long journeys would route through Boone Ranch specifically to rest at Iron Hearth, to eat Clara's cooking, to experience the warmth and welcome that had become legendary. Money came in steadily. Clara paid her staff well, bought quality ingredients, invested in improvements. The winter jar she'd once filled with spare coins was now a bank account, and she had enough saved to weather any disaster. But more than the money, more than the success, what mattered was the transformation she witnessed daily. Women who arrived beaten down by life would leave standing taller. Travelers who came in hungry and desperate would depart fed and hopeful. Children who'd never tasted good food would eat pie and smile like they'd been given magic. Clara was feeding bodies, but she was also feeding souls, and she understood now what Jack had meant. This was what love looked like when it was real. Not romance or grand gestures, but showing up every day and giving people what they needed most. One afternoon in their 3rd year of marriage, Clara was preparing bread when a familiar carriage pulled into the yard. Her hands stilled in the dough. That black lacquered wood, those brass fittings, those matched horses. She knew that carriage. Eleanor Pierce stepped down, older now, her beauty starting to fade at the edges. She wore an expensive dress that looked slightly worn, and her confident posture had developed a hint of uncertainty. Clara wiped flour from her hands and walked outside before Eleanor could knock. They stood in the yard, two women who'd once fought over the same man, and Clara waited. "I heard about this place," Eleanor said finally. "Iron Hearth. Everyone talks about it in Cheyenne, about the woman who can cook miracles." She looked at Clara properly for the first time. "I didn't realize it was you." "What do you want, Eleanor?" "I don't know." Eleanor's voice was smaller than Clara remembered. "I'm traveling to California. My third husband died last month, and there's nothing left for me in Wyoming. I thought—" She trailed off, then started again. "I remembered Silas saying you gave people chances." Clara studied the woman who'd once called her a charity case, who'd mocked her size and poisoned her confidence. Eleanor looked tired now, worn down by life and bad choices and the consequences of valuing the wrong things. "Are you asking for a meal?" Clara asked. "I'm asking if you have work." The admission seemed to cost Eleanor something. "I have money for now, but it won't last. And I can't cook worth a damn, but I can clean. I can take direction. I can—" She stopped, pride and desperation warring on her face. "I need work." Clara should refuse, should turn Eleanor away and let her experience the same rejection Clara had lived with for 27 years. It would be justified, deserved. But Clara thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, desperate and alone, given a chance by someone who didn't owe her anything. Thought about Jack's words about kindness and what it cost. "The job is hard," Clara said. 14-hour days. You take orders from me and my staff. You clean up after travelers who don't always respect you. The pay is fair, but not generous." Eleanor's eyes widened. You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to earn one. Work today. See if you can handle it. If you do well, we'll discuss permanent employment." Clara paused. "But Eleanor, if you take this job, you work for me. Not beside me. Not as an equal. For me. Can you accept that?" The question hung between them, weighted with history. Eleanor had once looked at Clara with contempt, had tried to convince Silas that Clara wasn't good enough. Now she was being asked to accept Clara's authority, Clara's success, Clara's superiority in this domain. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "I can accept that." "Then come inside. Sarah will show you what needs doing." Eleanor followed Clara into Iron Hearth, and Clara watched as Sarah Miller, who'd also once mocked her, gave Eleanor a bucket and mop and pointed at the dining hall floor. It should have felt like victory, like revenge. But Clara only felt tired recognition that everyone was just trying to survive in whatever way they knew how. That evening, Clara found Silas in his office reviewing ranch accounts. "Eleanor's here," she said without preamble. Silas's head snapped up. "What?" "She asked for work. I gave her a trial day." "You gave her—" Silas stood, his expression incredulous. "Clara, that woman tried to destroy you, tried to poison you against yourself. Why would you give her anything?" "Because someone once gave me something when I didn't deserve it," Clara said simply. "And because refusing her wouldn't undo the hurt she caused. It would just add more cruelty to a world that already has too much." Silas stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head in wonder. "You're a better person than I am." "No, I just remember what it felt like to be desperate." Clara moved to the window, looking out at Iron Hearth where lamplight glowed warmly in the evening. "She's not my enemy anymore, Silas. She's just another woman trying to survive in a world that's hard on all of us. And if I can help without sacrificing myself or my peace, why wouldn't I?" Silas crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "This is why I love you, not in spite of who you are, but because of it." Clara leaned back against him, feeling safe and valued and home. "She might not work out. She might quit tomorrow. Or she might learn what you already know, that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength." Eleanor stayed. She worked hard, kept her head down, and slowly earned her place among Clara's staff. She never apologized directly, but Clara saw it in the way Eleanor took direction without complaint, in the care she put into even the smallest tasks, in the gratitude that flickered in her eyes when Clara paid her at week's end. Some wounds didn't heal with words. They healed with time and action, and the choice to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past. 5 years after Clara first arrived at Boone Ranch, Iron Hearth had become an institution. Families planned their travel routes around it. Lonely travelers stopped there for the community as much as the food. Women from 3 territories came to work there, knowing they'd be paid fairly and treated with dignity. The ranch prospered too. Silas expanded operations, hired more hands, built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. But everyone knew the ranch's real treasure wasn't the livestock or land. It was the dining hall where Clara Whitmore Boone proved daily that worth wasn't measured in beauty or size or social standing. It was measured in the warmth you left behind, the lives you touched, the kindness you chose even when cruelty was easier. One evening, Clara stood on the hill above the ranch with Silas, watching sunset paint the valley in impossible colors. Below them, Iron Hearth glowed with lamplight and laughter. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Travelers' wagons dotted the yard. "Do you ever think about Red Hollow?" Silas asked quietly. Clara considered the question. "Sometimes, but not with sadness anymore. Just recognition that I had to leave there to become who I was meant to be." "Any regrets?" "Only that I waited so long. That I spent so many years believing their lies about my worth." Clara leaned into Silas's warmth. "But maybe I needed that time, needed to hit bottom before I could find the courage to climb out." "You're stronger than anyone I know," Silas said, not for the first time. "No, I'm just stubborn enough to keep trying when everyone said I should quit." Clara turned to face him, this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for valuing me when I was worthless, for loving me when I was unlovable." She touched his scarred face gently. "For building a life with me that I never dared dream of having." Silas caught her hand and pressed it against his cheek. "Clara, you were never invisible or worthless or unlovable. The world was just too blind to see you. I'm just the lucky bastard who looked at the right moment." They stood together on the hill while evening deepened around them. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something beautiful from rejection and loneliness and stubborn hope. Below them, Iron Hearth kept burning, a beacon in the wilderness proving that sometimes the people the world dismisses become the ones who change it. That kindness matters more than beauty. That worth is earned through character, not appearance. That everyone deserves a chance to prove what they're capable of when given the space to grow. Clara had learned these truths the hard way, through pain and rejection and years of being told she wasn't enough. But she'd also learned that other people's limitations didn't have to become her own, that the world's cruelty didn't have to make her cruel, that she could choose kindness even when it cost her something. And in choosing kindness, in feeding the hungry, healing the sick, employing the desperate, forgiving the cruel, she'd found something better than revenge or validation. She'd found peace. Not the peace of a life without struggle, because running Iron Hearth was hard work, and there were still difficult days. But the peace of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, loved by someone who saw all of her and valued every bit. The wind carried laughter from the dining hall below, and Clara smiled. Tomorrow she'd wake before dawn and start the whole cycle again. Check. Cooking, serving, teaching, giving. It was exhausting and demanding and sometimes thankless work. It was also the most meaningful thing she'd ever done. "Ready to go back?" Silas asked, gesturing toward the ranch house. Clara took one last look at the valley they'd built together. The thriving ranch, the glowing dining hall, the life that had seemed impossible 5 years ago. Then she took her husband's hand and started down the hill toward home. "Ready," she said. And she was. Ready for tomorrow's challenges, ready for whatever came next, ready to keep building this life one meal, one kindness, one choice at a time. The woman everyone had mocked had become the woman everyone remembered, not because she'd changed to fit their expectations, but because she'd stayed exactly who she was until the world finally caught up. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.